Jobs to be done begins with qualitative research, right? The first thing you have to do is define a focus job or a target job, and then go out and extract the job steps and the outcome statements and the various elements of jobs to be done. But the framework becomes really powerful when you then quantify that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with our special guest, quantifying jobs to be done. My name is Jim Callback. I am the author of the Jobs to be Done playbook and co-founder of the Jobs to be Done Toolkit, along with Elaine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine. As Jim mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders. Thank you for joining our March edition of Jobs to be Done Untangled. I have just a couple of quick announcements to share with everyone. We have a really exciting workshop schedule coming up in April. In addition to our Applying the Core Process, our very popular mini course that we've been running for a couple of years now, we're excited to offer 2 new workshops in partnership with a couple of experts in the Jobs to be Done field. So starting next week, we have Boost Sales with customer-centric OKRs and Jobs to be Done in partnership with Fred, who's joined us today. Hi, Fred. And we are really excited about this workshop. And then at the end of April, we are doing the JTBD Solution Sprint workshop with our partners over at Zenbridge. So again, really diving into how can you take the research that you do with Jobs to be Done and spin it into the organization? How do you use it in your day-to-day work? And then Jim, lastly, if you need coaching, Jim is available for custom advice, so feel free to reach out to him as well.
Yep. Wow, that's a lot, Elaine.
Yeah.
We're keeping busy here.
We sure are.
But
that's exciting.
It is exciting. And, I'm excited about our guest today, Dom Ricchetti. Hey, Dom, thanks for joining us.
Hi, nice to be here. Long-time listener, first-time presenter.
Right, yeah. Dom's a regular part of our community here. And we're probably remiss in not having put him up on stage prior to this, but we got you now, Dom. So thanks for joining us here. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Yeah, I started in engineering, and then I went into more product management roles and started to see that just building great technology products was not enough. You had to really solve for what customers want and what they're help them solve their problems. So that led me to more market research in different areas and jobs to be done particularly. I come at it from a little more quantitative background, both qual and quant work, but definitely specialize in quant, more advanced analytics stuff, wide range of different type of research. I worked at Intuit, Dell, Microsoft, ServiceNow, and I was a senior VP at Regus Global Market Research, where I had clients like Nordstrom, REI, Starbucks in the Seattle area. So, there's a lot of people here. And got outside of just the tech world. But at Microsoft and ServiceNow, 2 of my more recent roles, I worked on practices and research, like how to do different methodologies and how to look at a whole customer research system across the spectrum, mostly focusing in new product development, innovation stuff, and jobs to be done. It's always been a passion.
That's great. And I assume the affinity to quantification comes from your engineering background, or did you also study statistics or math, or what's the connection between engineering and the quant?
Yeah, I did operations research, as part of like engineering management and operations research, masters and stuff like that. And operations research is more about that decision making. And then in engineering, we have, Six Sigma practice is very much rooted in the research and applying it. Total quality management, Malcolm Baldrige, national award prize kind of stuff is focused around that. And I worked on that at Dell when I was there. So yeah, that's where more of that quantitative piece comes. And
nice. Yeah, that's good. My background tends to be more qualitative, right? Ethnography, in my design and innovation upbringing. But as I mentioned to you yesterday, Dom, I know enough about quantitative to be dangerous, but to not actually execute on it, right? I could spar with you a little bit, but you could probably lose me very quickly there as well too. But I think it's a really important part of the Jobs to Be Done framework, because sometimes you need that confidence. Stakeholders want to see the quantification as well, and it can be just another level of power to your whole research when you bring that quant in there. But I know a lot of people struggle with that. Right? The art of the interview and the qualitative side of things, it's hard to do all of that and do all the quantitative stuff. So we're really looking forward to some of the insights that you can give to the folks here. Let me just find my Zoom panel where the screen sharing is. And what I'll do is I'm going to stop sharing, Dom, so you can take the screen and walk us through some of the stuff. If you have any questions for Dom as we go along, you can put them in the chat. And at the end, we should have a lot of time to talk and ask questions directly to Dom. So with that, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, that's good. You can see first slide.
Yeah, we can see it. Yep, we got it.
Great introduction. Yeah, because I feel the same way about qual. I know enough to be dangerous when I'm executing qual projects, and we need each other as partners, so that we have that breadth of expertise. Always better with diversity, right? And I've done some things in a lot of coaching with people that are UX background and coming from qualitative experience to help them, get a little more view on quantitative world. So I'll just dive in with why do we do quant, begin with. So qualitative is really the best practice for discovering, who, what, why, gathering all that and building that out, articulating things in the customer's language when we're listening to them. Quantitative is, as quantitative says, it's about quantifying things, right? So we're trying to size and prioritize things. We could do that some off of qual, but it's much better to use quant to understand how big is this need? How unmet is it? And is it worth developing a solution? Like how do we prioritize what to develop? How many people are there that have this need? How many of these jobs down the list are really that big that, we should target them? And trying to quantify the value proposition. A further thing you can do with the quantitative data is cluster things much better. So we do some clustering in qual, we get everybody together in the room, we move all the sticky notes around on the board and all that stuff, right? And we do, theme clustering and other stuff. But with quantitative data, we could statistically figure out how to group the jobs, how to group people. And I'm not going to go into that much in this session, but if people are interested, we can certainly do something later. Let us know. So, doing even 50 interviews, I hear all the time, well, I've done 50 or 100 interviews over, the past. And so I have some quantitative knowledge, but it's different than doing surveys, with 50 completes. Because in a survey, we're consistently presenting all the jobs, we're presenting it the same way, we've got a controlled audience, and in that environment, then we've got everybody's pro and con and rating on everything exactly the same. So we could do comparisons and we could do more statistical analysis and have the confidence in it. Yeah. And this is something we developed at ServiceNow when I was at ServiceNow, and you'll see a lot of familiarity here. There's the double diamonds I overlaid on this. So the first two things are in design thinking, we have those double diamonds about diverging, building out, what are the possibilities of what we can go solve, and then converge on, well, what are we going to go solve? What is the big unmet need? How do we prioritize jobs? And have agreement on, well, what we're going to try to develop solutions for. And that's really the point where quantitative methods for jobs to be done is most applicable, very powerful, in that stage of it. It's not only what jobs align the problem, but who are we going to target? How do we get crisp and clear about what it is we're solving, who we're solving it for? And then even downstream, I'll say here, let's see if I can use some tools here. Let's see, like downstream here, all this part, right, is where we use jobs here more too, because we're using those to backtest. We said we were going to go solve this problem for these people. If we talk to these people and we show them the solution, We can not only go through, is the UI good and is it doing the right steps for them and things, but in the end, did we solve that problem for you? And so that's the back test on did we do the right thing? Yeah. All right. So that's why and when. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do in Jobs to Be on Quant. And we had a familiar framework here. Great Canvas 2.0 from Jim's work and book. This a great framework. There's several frameworks. There's the Strategian one, very similar, and other types of frameworks you might have developed for building out your jobs. But you think about the things in the top left here, the job performer and their aspirations, and those things are really what you would use to screen, filter, go source your audience and stuff to do your quant. So that's at the beginning of your survey. You're screening people to get them into the survey and making sure you have the right people. So you're going to use those things there. And then down in the bottom right, you've got, I'll just work across here, I guess. In the middle, the green box are, all of your main jobs, your big jobs, and even medium jobs, I'd say, are all the functional jobs. Those are the body of what you're going to test. That's what you're going to rate and rank and score and do most of your analysis on with this audience then. I leave out little jobs because they tend to be more steps that you take in the process of that more of the task analysis. They tend to be a little more related to the solution that you use and the tools that you use, the process that you go through, and not so much the kind of jobs about, well, what are we going to go solve? And then the bottom right, these profiling questions down here from job differentiators. So the differentiators are what context conditions, different kinds of experience or training people have, what tools are they using today, where do they come from, to get to having these jobs and needs. And those are the things that we would use to analyze how do the jobs turn out. So what's a big unmet need? Performs better for some groups than another, and we want to diagnose, well, why is that? What's that related to? And so we have these kinds of profiling questions about the people in order to do that analysis. Okay, top right, related jobs. You might include some of these, but I'd say only if that's really going to be a development priority. We don't want to get, veer off too far from things about what we're trying to focus on with this audience. Sometimes there's a need to investigate some overlap between different areas. Okay, that might make sense to include. And in the bottom left, the emotional and social jobs kind of depends on your product. Right? If you're doing a social media solution, maybe more social elements that you need to test. Those are important jobs to your product, right? If you're testing services for psychology, emotional jobs are going to be important. So, it kind of depends on your product. Most apps, software, a lot of other, things are very functional related about the experience. And so the main thing are the jobs in the middle here. Okay, and then the thing that may be a little more controversial here for me to clarify is about outcomes. So I know, Strategian's method's all about outcome-driven innovation. Everything's an outcome. I think it's more a matter of terminology here. So outcomes that are more like increase, decrease, those kinds of statements, maintain something. They call those outcomes. People will call those outcomes kind of a gray area to me. I think of that more of as a job. And so including those makes sense, but I'd hold off on anything that's really metrics, about how do you measure the outcome, what's the threshold, the amount, things like that. Anything that's a broad goal, I think here more like OKRs, right? Where you have a solid measurement of something. Those things tend to not be one-to-one with jobs, and they can kind of, confuse things, right? So you could include them in a survey and have them separate if you feel like you want to, but usually we got so much stuff to put in the survey anyhow. And you don't really need satisfaction measurement on these. It's just a matter of importance or where's your threshold and stuff like that. And so I would say hold off on these because if you prioritize the jobs first, if we go back to the first of where we're at in this process, right, we're we're here in the double diamond area where we're trying to figure out, align on a problem. And then as we move to the next stage and we've aligned on a problem, we've got much better focus about, well, which jobs, which people, and now we can go deeper on metrics. And the real point of, metrics are going to come into when do we test? When we test these solutions and stuff, we need to have some metrics out here. So in the second diamond is really probably much more likely that you're going to go after those kinds of outcomes. Okay. And then what should we prioritize? Well, everybody's familiar with job statements, I assume. If not, read Jim's book. And we have used it extensively, and I'll make shout out here to John Gustav on the call. Thanks for joining, John. He does some great stuff too with behavioral science and Make It Toolkit and some other stuff. You've probably seen some of these other things about how to build out jobs. So you're not a structured job. I will say here, don't do job and outcome combined or things that are combined. We don't want double loaded stuff. We want focus on the functional job and then prioritizing that and keep them separate, keep them singular. What was the other thing here? Oh, not his stories. So yeah, stories I put off till later too, because after you go through the jobs, you prioritize and you group and you get your target audience and stuff. You could build better stories. And then there's some different methods for those that are more around the kind of concept testing approaches. Here's some example jobs. We did a big study recently at ServiceNow that was looking into administrators of the platform. So enterprise B2B solution, administrator is a very important job, and we're trying to prioritize what to do for who and how to create the personas for different types of admins. And you can see that kind of structure of the verb and noun context around it. All right, so time for a deep cleansing breath. Everybody inhale and hold it and exhale and not sweat the details on some of this. We have a lot of these structures and frameworks, but I've seen people really get wrapped around the axle about, what's the right altitude, what are the right things to include. And I feel like if you don't worry about that and you build that list first, then it'll become much clearer when you start looking at that list and going through with the team. What is it we're actually going to test? How do we refine this list? And then you can adjust the altitude and consistency of the things that you're testing. We want, good consistency so that we can compare the ratings and rankings on them. But that's a better point to do it. I probably spend as much time refining lists as I do building them to begin with, especially now that AI helps build them to begin with. Definitely got to do your qual, but you should definitely refine stuff and then get your altitude and consistency right. Let's get into opportunity scoring. So this main section I'm going to talk about is, well, how do you do this quantification? This has been around a long time, often called gap analysis. Opportunity scoring and doing this kind of gap analysis was used for different kinds of activities and goals, all kinds of needs, capabilities, features, and things like that. But it's really been the heart and most common tool that we used for prioritizing jobs to be done. And then there's some new methods along the way that things have changed the past 10, 20 years, I'd even say. Let's see, 15, yeah, that things have been around, and using this is that we've moved away from scoring things with a percentage of the audience or percentage top two box. And those kinds of ways to look at the results. And we want to have individual level scoring. And we've considered some other stuff like adding frequency, which is often a metric that's important about what do we solve, and using MaxTIF techniques. I'll get into those at the end of the presentation today. And then there's some stuff I started to allude to was about the advanced analysis. That we can do grouping of the jobs and segmenting people to help with personas and figuring out what the MVP should be. I won't get into that today, but let us know if you'd like to hear more about that. So here's the heart of opportunity scoring. Most of you probably have heard about this. It's really two questions, that it's about importance and satisfaction. How important is this job to you? And it's a measure of, how big is this need? I use need loosely in terms, I know needs and jobs and outcomes are slightly different, but it's how big is it? And then satisfaction with your current way of doing it, and the current solutions you have available. That's how unmet is it in the market. And so we're looking for things that are really important, low satisfaction, big unmet needs, underserved in the marketplace. I show a 9-point scale here. It's what I've used most commonly. I highly recommend using 9-point scale. I feel like 5 doesn't differentiate enough. You get a lot of this clustering of your jobs, in the middle of mapping importance and satisfaction, right? And you're trying to distinguish those things. It becomes difficult. You want more differentiation in the responses. 9-point scale helps you get there. 7-point, probably okay, definitely better than 5. You could go to 11-point scale. That's the 0 to 10, like you use for likelihood to recommend for Net Promoter Score. That may be even better. I find it's not really that much more of a burden. The cognitive burden for people to answer a survey once they get oriented with a scale like this, if it's 11-point or 9-7 points, not really, going to take them more time to decide that. Sometimes it makes it easier for people because they want to answer something in between. Okay, and there's 2 ways of presenting stuff. So Jim, we talked about this a little bit and brought it up. So I threw something in here to talk about these 2 trade-offs. One is that you present the job and you ask the importance and satisfaction together. So that's on the left side here. I think that makes sense when it's a complex or a long job. So you got more to read, more to think about it. If it's really something more unique, or a complicated role or complicated type of a software solution or something, right? Then you have that, one time that you read it and think about it, and you do that direct comparison of having importance and satisfaction there. And the problem is, though, that you got to make a cognitive switch between rating importance, and I got to think about satisfaction, and the 2 different kinds of things that you're thinking about, right? On the right side, you have the other way of presenting, and this is what I've done the majority of the times. And this, I feel, is what's most appropriate for most jobs because we try to keep them simple, clear, concise. We got lots of statements of stuff, and we want to get the importance and satisfaction rating on them. So going through them in blocks of showing the statements, a grid question where they're rating stuff, they can orient their mind to, I'm rating importance now, I'm thinking about these things of importance, and I can compare, well, how am I rating importance on these different things? And then they go through thinking about satisfaction. And I'd make some statement in there in between, like, now we're going to ask you a different question because it might kind of look the same. And it's like, oh, I read this job before. Why are they asking me again? It's like, well, we're asking something else about it. So we want to be clear, the context switch and what people are thinking. And that really helps. A few notes at the bottom here. We've done some research on research comparing both of these and found there really wasn't a statistical difference in the results we got. It wasn't a big difference in people preferring things. Just my recommendations here about why you might lean one way or the other. Certainly test your surveys and test it with your internal team. It's not only fun, but helps them to learn, well, why are we doing research, and that their answers could be wrong until they do their do their survey and ask customers. On the right side, talking about how to present stuff. You could present blocks, about 8 to 12 at a time, break it up. You can even, add some other questions between if you had a really big study, really long list, organizing them in things that make sense when they're thinking about any area of jobs and doing all the importance responses. But I definitely randomize how I present the list between different people. And then this has been the traditional way to look at stuff. So a lot of you probably have seen this. This is from Tony Hallwick and Stratogen. Originally came up with this view of looking at things with satisfaction on the y-axis here. So going up the left side, importance along the bottom. And then you see the way that things are interpreted here. There's this center line where it's, this is like a 1-to-1 line right down the center, but these lines of where he's created thresholds over the time are slanted differently because, or emphasizing importance. So This is more from practice, that importance should have a much bigger weight in the opportunity scoring about what do we go after. So it's a 2x the importance has been what people have used. This bears out pretty well. We've done some regression modeling and other things to say, well, how much should this weigh into the decision about opportunity scoring? It makes a lot of sense. So that's good. The problem has been where this originally had only a 5-point scale, and now I think people are using 11 points, 0 to 10, and other things too to help with differentiation. But the other problem was that interpretation about percentage of people that rated, top 2 box, bottom 2 box, or percentage of the audience group. That analysis can only be done within groups, right? You got to have a group to say a percentage of them. We really want individual level responses so that then we could do other advanced analysis on grouping them and figuring out segments. So a couple of things that we want to fix in that process. And so then you get to this. Next step. Oh, so another word of caution is, just don't interpret quadrants. I've seen people just classify stuff in quadrants, and you run into this problem at the crosshairs here where you have, things that are just on this side, versus this side versus right here. And all these things in the middle are really not that different in terms of importance and satisfaction, but you're throwing them into a different quadrant and classification. That's not a good idea. We need some other way to approach that. And so what we want to do is interpret stuff like this. So you're in my drawings there. Okay, you're in the upper left, where you have the strongest opportunities is the highest importance. And I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, this is traditionally how I've looked at all the graphs. So this time my slides was that the importances on the left side scaled up and down in importance, and the x-axis is satisfaction. So the upper left would be the strongest opportunity where you have high importance and low satisfaction, right? That's the strongest opportunities. And then you get work down to the bottom right where you have high satisfaction, low importance. That's where you'd have the least amount of opportunity. Okay. One other thing to think about here is that the left side of things are high importance, or more of a greenfield kind of opportunity. That there's things are low satisfaction in the marketplace. So they is really underserved, right? And call it greenfield is another way to look at it. And on the right side, at the upper right here, you might have things that even kind of fall into this area. Let's say like over in this area, right? That it's a high satisfaction, but the importance is relatively high. You might not score it, opportunity scoring very high, but you have to think about it in terms of competing with the competition. Right? Because if you're in the market and people are satisfied with other people's solutions, you might need to cover yourself on those features, or how do you compete? Maybe you're not going to use that for innovating, but you got to have some kind of investment and cover off that that's definitely a part of people's process. And so you need to deliver something on there. And so that's just another consideration in interpreting the results. Okay, so let's get into some numbers, do some math. When I use the 1 to 9 scale, what I want to do is get to an opportunity scoring at 0 to 100. So, on the right side here, you see sorry, keep brushing the button. You see that the score of 100 here, opportunity score of 100, is where you have 9 on importance and 1 on satisfaction, right at the bottom. And you want to do this calculation at the individual level. We want to use that full range, like having 0 to 100, because it's a little easier to interpret than having some other range of numbers, like was in that original Stratogen approach. And I see some other approaches like that too, where it's like 0 to 25 or 33 or some different kind of numbers. A little harder to think about, well, is this in the middle or not? And then I give you a formula here, so you can go to, you want to get 2 times the importance. And so start off with that from practice, and then the importance score 9 minus 1 because we're adjusting it so it'll go down to 0. 9 minus the SAT. So we have the inverse of the SAT, because when SAT's lower, we want a higher opportunity score. When SAT's higher, we want a lower opportunity score. So it's the inverse of that. And then there's just a scale factor that gets you from 0 to 100. So you get a full range of results. So this is what I use for opportunity scoring most often. If you have a 7-point or 11-point scale, I'll give you some formulas down here. So you can use those accordingly. All right, now let's talk a little bit about raising the bar. Some of the things I get excited about are some of the unique things we've done along the way for different types of projects. Have a different call for doing stuff. And there's two things to think about. One is frequency of doing stuff. So from a UX point of view, certainly from product management point of view, frequency can play a big role in, well, what are we trying to solve? Is it just in the initial onboarding and setup of something with or doing a an app update or something that only occurs occasionally, or is it something you're doing constantly all the time, daily? Then it's much more important to solve that. It's going to have a much bigger contribution to satisfaction with the solution in the end. So you can add frequency. You get something off to the right here where you have the upper left is highest importance, highest frequency, lowest satisfaction. That would be your highest priority. Of course, lowest priority be low importance, low frequency, and already have high satisfaction with it. So low priority of something to go solve. The other thing down here that I show is a variation on satisfaction question, and that's to ask efficiency of getting it done rather than satisfaction. This came up when we have enterprise platform service now, and we're talking to the service desk agents, right? The people who provide the support calls and are using the platform. They're not the people that are deciding to install that platform or what features to enable and all the setup and process, right? They're just the users in the end. So definitely a customer is important to solve for, but it's their management who's going to answer us about satisfaction with those features and the product. And the agents, we want to make them more efficient. So the optimization was really around efficiency for those people. And we substituted efficiency for satisfaction in that study. How important is it to you? How efficiently can you get it done rather than satisfaction? And we did gap analysis on those and scoring accordingly with that. Yeah. Just a quick comment about frequency. I know a lot of words here, so you can have this and look at it, but on frequency on that scale, when you think about it, it's not really linear, right? You have never versus multiple times a day. But you have stuff in between, monthly or less often, that's 12 times a year. Once a week, 50 times a year, 52, whatever, and so you have it's not a very linear scale. So you have to make some adjustment for it. We translate each of those points into days of the year, and then you can compute mean frequency for all of the respondents and create an index. Is this person answering that they're doing it more frequently than others, less frequency, more frequent than the average, less frequent than the average? Because some things too inherently are not done very frequently, right? Some things are more likely to be frequent. So using this kind of an index is a much better way to look at frequency. And then what do you do with these things when you're trying to create an opportunity score? Well, if you have like importance and frequency and then efficiency instead of satisfaction, now you figure, well, how do I weight these into an equation, that's going to compute one score for me? So what we did in this case was we created a regression model. You got to have some kind of a dependent variable. You can create a score overall or something like, how satisfied overall, how likely are you to recommend overall? And you do a regression model of how much does importance, frequency, or efficiency contribute to that in the end. And then we can come up with numbers about how do we weight these things to create a score. All right, and then the next thing about advancing and talk about is using MaxDiff. So actually, I think just one of the early things that Jim and I started to talk about when we were talking about quant studies, you may have heard some people doing this, and MaxDiff is a great thing to use instead of just a rating question. It's a basic type of conjoint, but you get better results because you maximize the difference in how people are responding. So instead of going down a rating scale and just having discrete numbers that they're answering, you're asking people, which one of these is most important? Which one is least important? And then you may show them 3, 4, 5 at a time. Then you show them another combination. And so there's a set model that you create about, well, how do you show these different combinations to show things enough and get all the trade-offs? And when people are answering most and least, you're forcing them to make all these trade-offs. Essentially, you're getting them to stack rank them, but you're also getting kind of a coefficient, a utility that you're scaling this stack rank. So you're forcing people to, give you different responses about what's more important than the other things and how much more important is it. The thing about this exercise is that if you have 40 jobs, you're not showing just 4 blocks of 10 and asking importance rating. Instead, you're showing 5 at a time like this. You would show 24 of these screens. So it's a lot of screens where people got to reread some things or reread them like 3 times, in the course of going through those exercises, but they become familiar when you're rereading them. And so you're going through that process. And actually it may be a little more real estate, but it doesn't take people much longer. It's not really a bigger cognitive burden because it's kind of a, gaming, a funner way of doing it to look at stuff and just pick most least important. Usually there's a much easier answer to just select those things. And so they're going through the different screens and doing that. It's kind of a fun exercise I've heard from people. If you have a really big list, there's some adaptive techniques and some other things to add to this, more complicated, but you can do bigger lists too. We've done 200 of them. The thing that we add to that to make it a scaled max diff, when you do this, max diff, you get a relative result. You get these utilities that are all relative to each other. Now we want to make it an absolute measure, and we want to get it back to that kind of, is it extremely important or not at all important? And a common way of doing that in sawtooth tools, probably most common for doing max diff, they have this anchoring method where after you answer that first question, you'll have a follow-up on the same page and says, are all of these important, some of these important, or none of these important? And they use that response. But you got to ask that after each of these, 24 questions that you're asking, right? Instead, this approach is to let them go through the whole max diff, get in that mode of most least important, and then from their responses, we can figure out, well, what seems to be some of their highest jobs and their lowest importance jobs. And we pull those on the fly for that respondent, show them, and then ask them to give us a rating. So now we've got an absolute rating on those things, and we can use it to scale the whole set of utilities for each respondent across all 40 of those jobs. And, we've got a nice 1 to 9. It's not just 1 to 9. It's not discrete numbers. You have their response on this was 5.2, and the response on this was, 5.8. and 6.2, and stuff. So you have a more scaled result and more differentiated. And last pro tip I'll say is to include some of the key competitor jobs. And you look at their marketing, what are they pitching that they're solving? What's the benefit of what they're doing? What is that solving for, right? So you can extract jobs, or you can do things that you've tested before that perform well. We've even done some studies where we did scaled max diff on a big set of jobs and then came back a year later, did another big set of jobs, and we could compare those two things because we had these measures in comparison. But including them in your study really helps you interpret stuff, because it's like, gee, everybody thought competitors were really great at bringing out this feature and they were solving something. Now we're trying to innovate, new areas that we can go. Did it perform better than that one? That would be a sure sign. It's like, okay, we got winners here or not. And last thing I'll say is, people have asked about sample size. Minimum 150 gets you good statistical measure, confidence in results. More is always better. If it's an easy low-cost sample, sure, 1,000, 2,000, love it, and get tighter margin of error, so easier to compare more stuff. But that n equals 150 is really per group. So if you have, some of that screening or profiling that you're trying to target different quotas of groups in your survey, you got to think about trying to get 150 of each of them, right? So you have enough confidence in them that you can compare those two groups. If it's really hard to get those groups, I'd say at least 75. Maybe 50 might turn up statistically good enough. Everybody's answers are in agreement and very consistent. But when you do the statistical testing after and you only have 50 in some subgroup, you might find out, gee, we got to go get more of that subgroup, in order to have confidence in the statistics to do that. And the max diff modeling doesn't take anything more. I mean, it's kind of a low threshold with max diff, about 150 or 200. But otherwise, you don't have to worry about, if you use max diff method, of having bigger sample in different subgroups or anything. The other side of that is getting representation. So it's not only numbers, but that you have representation of these different quota groups, coverage across the broad range. And I've had, product managers tell me, we only want to do the survey with these people. It's just these people with this title. That's the only thing we're solving for. That's what we want to be focused on. It's like, well, titles are a horrible way to describe what people do. And if we should be solving for them. You got to come up with what is it. And then you'll find that people in other titles and people in some broader range, need to be in the audience. We need representation of them so that we could actually prove that or be clearer about what it is that we're targeting. And so just wrap up that, it's a lot of powerful methods here. If you have a big investment, competition is strong, new product category that you're getting into, things like that would drive you to, investing more and more powerful method, having a bigger survey, more analysis that you're putting into it. If you're already a successful product and you're just adding on, that you're differentiating, you're trying to build out some innovation areas, probably don't need it so much. To go this deep, right? Start with importance and satisfaction, use a 9-point scale, and build from there. Yeah. All right.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for that, Dom. Great information. And I believe you said you can make these slides available as well, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
That's good. Yeah, because I almost definitely failed the test if there was a test on this subject material, which, as I said, I know enough about quant that I could follow along, but I don't feel like I can do any of this. Are you available for hire or for coaching for anybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Go to my LinkedIn. I think Elaine shared my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You can share it again and stuff too. So best way to contact me and message me there. I'm semi-retired, so I'm doing a lot of career counseling, coaching and
Great.
stuff, and projects, got a big network of people, chime in on webinars like Untangled here and stuff in the past. Yeah. Happy to.
Yeah, that's great. So along those lines too, for someone like me who's more in terms of my experience steeped in the qualitative side of things, what's one or two simple things I can do to start to understand the quant side of things better? Like, should I start with like max diff or regression analysis, or like where do I start understanding quantification a little bit?
Yeah, don't start with those.
Okay, yeah, exactly. That was a softball. I was setting you up for.
Yeah, I figured that. But so you're probably, if you're not doing any quant now, at least start with asking importance and satisfaction.
Okay.
And even if you feel uncomfortable with big scale or anything, start somewhere. I would say use the 9-point scale and see how you like it and everything. Get people oriented to that. And doing importance and satisfaction, and just having those two metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And using Excel and putting it in an XY grid and looking at where stuff falls out is just tremendous, depth versus where you might be now. I'm sure you get your team together, and you review all these things. You do interviews, you're talking about what people have mentioned. But like I was saying, even if it's 50 people you talk to, it's not the same consistent presentation. Even if you ask them, hey, here's a rating scale, give me a rating scale. And you say,
Right.
okay, well, it's probably not the same consistent presentation ratings that you're having on a broad enough audience and having it in one fell swoop. So doing that and applying it, that's really the place to start. And I think that will naturally lead to, more questions and trying to get more advanced in approaching it.
Gotcha.
And that's where I end up doing a lot of consulting, actually.
Yeah. Elaine, any questions from you?
No questions from me, but we do have some from the audience on the mural.
All right.
A couple of good ones, and then I think John, thank you. He has a couple of questions, sort of hitting on some key terms. But Andres had the first question of the group. Do you want to come on and ask the question, or should we just read it out?
Andres.
Right. Hello. Thanks for the presentation. My question was around whether it makes sense to, in the text, in labeling for the satisfaction inputs in the survey, if it would make sense to label the last one as over-satisfied somehow instead of extremely satisfied, because extremely satisfied sounds positive, while it could be that somebody is receiving much more than what they need from a specific tool product.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have not tried to do that. I guess I don't know if anybody else has, if they have a comment about what what does over-satisfied mean. I guess there's definitely the phenomena of, well, you've made the product more complex than it needs to be. You've solved it too far, right? And it's and I'm over-satisfied in that sense. That may be about more about focusing on what are the key jobs or the combination of jobs for the right audience, and how do I focus what the product is that I'm solving for. That's the main thing I could think of.
Any thoughts from the group on that? Extremely satisfied versus over-satisfied. I mean, semantically, for me, the word satisfied kind of means it's in the middle, right? And just the word extremely satisfied is almost like, well, what does that actually mean? So it's a good question.
Yeah, it extremely came out of, when you have a 5-point scale and it's like not satisfied to very satisfied.
Yeah.
We want to exaggerate it. It's like, why would people say the 9, on that scale? It's like extremely satisfied, right? So you put labels on it that help exaggerate the spectrum of that scale and get more differentiation in the response. Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
And just like a motor score. Yeah.
Great. Did that help, Andres?
But just to clarify, what I meant is about specifically like maybe willingness to pay or pricing strategy because of for instance, I mean, one concrete example is if you think of Adobe Photoshop, which is extremely powerful but also pricey, compared to Canva, which is much more limited but a lot cheaper, and so there's an opportunity there for Canva to disrupt by creating a cheaper product which assesses or addresses enough of the customer needs.
Yeah, good. Hey, I got to follow.
Go ahead.
John.
I would probably highlight that's a good place to consider Alwick's strategy matrix in terms of his 2x2 grid of get the job done better, get the job done worse, charge less, charge more, like more from a opportunity for disruption.
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw another question here too is related about willingness to pay. So I'll say, on that, it's like pay more, pay less. It's in willingness to pay. I've done a lot of conjoint for pricing analysis on how do you combine features and stuff and price them. It's more about the features, how you're delivering it is more related to willingness to pay rather than solving the job. So it's farther down the process, next diamond. After you come up with the solution, now you can ask more about willingness to pay and building that and how much would you charge for it. Yeah.
Gotcha. A quick clarification, Dom. When you do the satisfaction, are you asking participants to say how satisfied they are with a specific solution? Are you framing it as, I don't know, whatever, ServiceNow? Or are you saying, how satisfied are you to get it done with any option available to you?
Yeah, with any option available to you. So,
Okay, right.
yeah, and we've actually, when we've tested the jobs too, we want to get outside of our own customer base, right?
Right.
Because we want to keep selling to our own customer base, even though it's great. I'm using ServiceNow as a reference here. We did this in Microsoft too. That it's you want to get people outside of that
Yeah.
you're also solving this job for. So I don't know if I showed it in some of those examples of the admin jobs. We had that insertion of platform in there. So
Right.
it's like if you're using Salesforce to do this, it's like expanding and learning about Salesforce versus about ServiceNow because that's what your tool is, and how would you rate that job?
Okay.
So that had some context to it, but it's with any solution. And
Any
actually,
solution.
when we were talking to accountants, we found a lot of them preferred to use a whiteboard on the wall
Sure.
to manage all their projects. Even if you gave them a software tool, it's like, we don't want to have to open that up.
Right.
We don't want. It's like, we got it all right here. It's all visual, and it's like, we don't want
Yeah.
another solution. It's an alternative. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, Elaine, we wanted to go over to Matt and then end
Yeah.
with John. John had a bunch of points. Is that right, Elaine?
Yes, that's correct. Matt, are you still on? Would you like to come up and ask your question?
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Dominic. Really appreciate the presentation. I am a pretty young product manager at a small startup, and we've not done any quantitative research yet. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on tools like survey building tools that are sufficient to get this job done of pulling out data and being able to analyze it in this way. So, sorry, newbie question, but really curious.
Yeah. Qualtrics was probably one of the most popular, not one of my favorites. SurveyMonkey is a great tool too, easy one to start with. And a lot of them will, give you some kind of cuts of the data and view of the data to write in the tool. But I found, I don't know if you're familiar with or comfortable with Excel, I should say, but just pulling the data into Excel and working with it is very hands-on, easy way to do things. And then, the next level of tool, I would say there's a class of tools that are for crosstab banners. So when you want to cut stuff by different audiences and filter it and, figure out relationships between things, there's some easier tools for that. There's even some free ones for it, Qualtrics, and I'm not sure if SurveyMonkey, but some of the other tools out there have some of this crosstab feature built into it. And that's really the place to start. A lot of them have a lot of good training. My favorite tool was Q Research and Displayer. Displayer is the name of the company, Display R, letter R. And they have two tools. Displayer is their web one. Q Research is the one you load on your computer. To do analysis, and tremendous amount of training and videos and stuff are there to use that one too.
Awesome.
And then just to follow up, since we're talking about some of
Mhm.
the technical stuff, Fred was asking, how do you get 500 to 1,000 people to take this survey? And Andreas asked also, especially if they're people that might be outside of your customer base.
Yeah, I mean, with your own customer base, just for them to contribute to, what you're going to do with the product is enough incentive a lot of times. There are sample providers, though, that have built panels and contacts of people who complete surveys. Unfortunately, it's gotten ugly. I guess we'll say it. There's a lot of cheaters and speeders and other stuff like that. So something in doing a survey is always to not be shy in cleaning the data. We call it to look at responses. If somebody went down that block of, importance ratings of stuff and they just straight line, it's like everything's the same importance, everything's the same satisfaction, like toss that person. It's like that. If you're paying for these sample houses to provide you contacts to reach people, then you shouldn't pay for those. So when you clean data, usually you tell them, okay, these are the people I took out I'm not paying for that person. Obviously, you got somebody bad on your panel, happens. There's a lot of that going on. And I've seen people use, what is it? Amazon has Mechanical Turk. It's like, people that you pay them little bits of money to do things and stuff. So if you just want a wide sample, I don't know, I haven't been too excited about that sample. Usually you're trying to be a little more targeted. Forums, associations, and things like that, publications, and trying to recruit people from those sources is a good way to find people. You can ask AI where to find them. Give you some good suggestions too.
All right.
John, do you want to take just a couple of the last minutes to ask Dom one of your questions?
Yeah, so one of my questions, Don, is like you're looking at quantitative research based upon different points in the double diamond, kind of pre-product design and post-product design.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in terms of when you think about the individuals you're serving, right? In the pre-diamond piece, there's buyers, right? There's multiple job performers. Like, how do you think about that in terms of who you're serving, the role they play? Because in a pretty broad job map, right?
Yeah.
Certain roles are going to have different priorities or potentially weighting relating to how you score jobs.
Yeah, or even different jobs. Yeah, that's a good point. So when you think about journey map of the consumption, Tony Allwood calls it, it's like the purchase process and everything. Those people who are decisions and buyers, especially for something like enterprise software, are very different people than the end users. So their jobs and going through that evaluation of stuff would be quite different. I treat them as separate studies and different audiences. And, those are the two main breaks, I would say. So the end users are really who I had in mind as I was talking about this stuff today. But similar method to people in the consumption process, different performers though, and different jobs and evaluating things.
And to John's point, Dom, I usually think about the quantification piece being centered around one job performer. That if you do have end user, and there might even be different types of end users. There might be an administrator or installer, and then there's the buyer as well too. Those would be separate studies. Is that how you think about it? And this goes for you too, John, in terms of.
Yeah, well, there might be a lot of overlap in jobs. So if you screen them into the study and you have those different audiences, maybe you show a different subset of jobs to those different groups of people. You've really complicated your data analysis now. If you're not familiar with the crosstab tools and other stuff to cut stuff, then you've probably made your problem more difficult. So if you're a beginner at it, take them separately. Probably a good point. Yeah.
And I'm a beginner at it, as we've said, coming from my qual, where I was like, let's just do a survey on one. I don't know, John, if that makes any difference in your understanding here.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, you call out in your book, right? There's buyers, there's jobs performers, and then those can be broken down further. So I think, Dom, when you answered kind of they're separate studies, you potentially focus on different pieces of the overall job map when you're surveying different targeted buyers or job performers.
Yeah.
Right. And then I want to point out to Wolfram's answer here too, that they add questions up front, because one thing that I found, Dom, and we can end with this too, is it's kind of like the more people that take a survey, right? You get into 1,000, 9,000 people. I find that the scores go to the middle always, right? And then what you need handles to segment those scoring, which are the different segments or the job differentiators. Is that right? Do you see that also, that the more you sample, the more the scores just go to the middle, right?
Well, yeah, if you have a broader audience and target, then you're going to have more people saying what's important to me, and other people it's not important, and then you get this big, average, right? Everything. So it does, it's difficult, I would say, when you have that big audience to just look at it a total. You want to differentiate them. That's the profiling. So you would cut those different types of people, different context, different experience levels. But even more so, doing a statistical cluster analysis to group those people is the most differentiating way. And you learn new things about how to cut them. That then the profiling might give you some diagnostics to it, but your cluster analysis is much more powerful in doing that. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that if people are interested.
We're going to have you back on, I think. Elaine, I already set up Dom for later in the year to do another talk here with us. Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining. We're 2 minutes after the hour. This is going to be recorded. I hope to do an interview with Dom, and he's going to make the slides available so the conversation goes on. But want to thank everybody for attending. Elaine, any other final words?
Our next Untangled will be on Tuesday, April 29th.
Yeah.
So there's a link to register in the chat. We will have a special guest.
Yep.
And I look forward to seeing everybody there.
Yes.